Hi, and welcome to the Rare Business Podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm a consultant, advisor, researcher, and writer on all things related to customer service and customer experience. Through this podcast, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, and leading thinkers about what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees in this fast-moving modern age that we live in. If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then welcome, and please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 250 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then thank you for returning, and I'll aim to do a good enough job to keep you coming back week after week. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Larry Skowronek, who is the Vice President of Product Management at NICE. Hey, Larry, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am very well, sir. Very well. I do believe that we're both sharing a slightly gloomy sort of day. Well, it is gloomy here. I hope you're faring slightly better with the weather right now.
Yes, we are. I'm here in Atlanta, and spring has sprung. The sun is out. The daffodils are blooming. It's good.
Well, you're now making me jealous, Larry. You're now making me jealous. So, Larry, for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also about the work that you do?
Sure. So, yeah, I am with NICE in the product management, product marketing role, and I'm part of what we call the customer engagement analytics line of business, and our focus is on just that, analyzing customer engagements, and that includes speech analytics, text analytics, journey analytics, and now predictive behavioral routing.
Okay.
So, we're looking at all of the different ways in which we can use analytics to help customer engagement.
Fantastic. Now, before we get stuck into some of the stuff that you're doing, because I really want to talk to you about some of the cool stuff that you've got going on, I wanted to start by just stepping back a little bit and talking about the environment in general, because we've seen all sorts of, I'm sure you've seen them as well. I mean, we've seen all sorts of stats and predictions from, various sources that predict by, 2020 or so, that as much as 85% of all customer service interactions are going to be handled without the need for a human agent. So as somebody in this sort of space, I just wanted to ask you, do you believe that?
Well, not really. I think that my view on this is, and what we have continued to see is that, yes, more and more of the interactions are being handled by machines. Artificial intelligence is making that those different channels much more effective. But what is also happening is that's making the human interactions that much more important.
Right.
And what's happening is that the machines are taking the easy jobs and the easy interactions, and all the hard ones are being left for the people.
Okay, and that's also going to. That surely is going to change according to, what sector and industry that you're involved with, and also so the different types of customers and how that might change maybe across, demographics, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Different quote generations of people have different, tastes about how they want to do these things.
Yeah. And so I guess the other thing I wanted to just quickly on this to ask is that, because I know that some companies want to use technology or develop some of their digital platforms as a way of deflecting, I guess, calls, almost like kind of minimizing kind of costly, service interactions, particularly things like, inbound phone calls and things. I mean, and that's been talked about for a long time. I mean, with this emerging technology space, do you also kind of think that whilst technology might be trying to eliminate some of the simpler tasks or the more mundane sort of tasks, do you actually see call volumes kind of going kind of down, or is it just that are they kind of staying steady because they're handling more complex sort of situations?
It's much more the latter. The initial promise of these technologies was that they would cut down the number of phone calls. And what's happening is that people are having more interaction, but the phone calls that are left are those more complex ones.
Right.
It's another way to provide a good user experience in the way that the customer wants. And when you approach it like that, in terms of what does the consumer want, then it becomes a really valuable, arrow in your quiver, so to speak, in terms of delivering customer engagement.
Absolutely, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, and the people that sort of eschew the opportunity to speak to a customer on the phone are really missing out on a great opportunity, I guess. So, but the thing
absolutely.
But the thing I wanted to ask you about, the thing I really wanted to talk to you about, is some of the cool tech that you guys have been developing to help their organizations make those interactions kind of more, empathetic, from things like, routing calls to the most appropriate person based on how the customer sounds, to tracking sentiment, tracking, monitoring, modeling the whole journey from start to finish. I mean, can you tell me about some of this stuff? I mean, that sort of intelligent routing and the tracking sentiment and also the modeling sort of stuff. I mean, and also kind of like how they got developed, the problems they solve, and and what's been the impact on things like customers and employees. And I do recognise that's a really long question.
Yeah. Well, how much time do we have?
Oh, I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm interested, so I'm ready.
Okay. So if we kind of, we look at things like from the perspective of, we have to gather all the data and analyze it and get to what's interesting and important and what are root causes of the problems and what needs to change. And then you've got to go ahead and fix those things. And so if we kind of start at the end of the chain at say, with routing, where, routing is like the ultimate application of analytics at the point of engagement, right, of making that connection between those two humans. And with predictive behavioral routing, which is something that we're doing now after our acquisition of Mattersight last year, it's a really exciting application of the results of analytics. And what we're doing is analyzing the communication style, the personality communication style of the consumer, and understanding what type of a communicator are they, and then matching them up with the agent who is the best fit for that type of communicator. Okay,
that's perfect. I mean, so tell me, how are you doing that? I mean, is it because, so if we get into, I mean, if you think about the tech, I mean, is that done through your analyzing kind of word choice, or how are you doing that?
Well, it's based on something called the process communication model, which was developed in the 1970s, I believe.
Right.
And it's been used to NASA used it, has been using it for a long time to make choices about, who are the astronauts that should be on the same crew. You want people who can communicate well with each other and, develop that really strong sympathetic communication.
Right.
And so what we do is apply that to customer communications. And what it does is it analyzes the consumer speech and fits them into a profile of what type of personality communication style do they have.
Okay, and so can you give me an example of how that would work in practice? I mean, does that go down to the sort of thing like with the technology pickup that this is likely to be, feels like a complaint because the person feels slightly kind of angry and short, they're speaking quite fast and kind of using short sentences, as it were, and therefore they direct them to the right person to deal with that sort of complaint. Is that how it would work?
Well, what it's doing is it's picking up on their word choices, on the rate of speech, on the pitch and tone, and all of the different elements of your communication. And one type of communicator is very much to the point, very factual, simply wants to get something solved. Another type of communicator wants to develop an emotional connection with the person they're talking to. And they both may have the same end goal in mind with the business that they're calling. They both may want to fix a problem with their bill, right? Or they both may want to buy a new service. But the style ends up, if you can match the style of communication of the agent with that consumer, the transaction is a whole lot easier. It can be faster, which means that the business can save on total talk time, which is a cost reduction strategy. we see with it benefits of 7%. There was a financial services company that just by matching the communication styles of the agent and the consumer, they saved an average of 7% of the communication time on phone calls.
Wow,
and that's huge.
Yeah, no,
right?
that's enormous when you when you aggregate it all up.
Yeah, and another business improved their overall customer satisfaction. Right, the way they measured it, it resulted in a 5% improvement in CSAT.
Wow.
And so it's just about getting that last mile of matching of the agent and the consumer.
And so how does that work from a customer's perspective? I mean, do they come in through, say, if it's a call, come through sort of a standard sort of contact center sort of like phone number, and they might enter an IVR where the IVR asks them to describe their problem, and then you do the analysis and then route them, or how does it work in practice?
So it works in practice by the first time the customer calls up, the first time we hear from that consumer, we don't know anything about their personality.
Sure.
Right? And so over the course of that transaction, the machine listens to that person and figures out what their personality communication style is. And the next time they call up, now we know. Right?
Okay.
And of course, we know what number they're calling from, right? And now we can, out of all the available agents who have the right skill, they'll go through the IVR in the same way they used to, right? Maybe if this is a call where they want to buy an additional service.
Right.
Right. And so they'll go to that queue, and then of all of the available agents right now, who's the best one, most suited personality-wise to match up with that consumer.
Okay.
And that's the choice that'll be made. So instead of it being the longest available agent, which is really basically random,
yes,
right? This is, let's match it with the best fit.
Okay. And on the kind of the actual tracking of the sentiment, I mean, I know that a lot of companies are doing sort of they're using natural language processing where they're converting voice to text and then analyzing kind of the words. But that always struck me that by doing that, you might strip out the kind of the tone and the pitch and the volume that's included in voices, which is a huge element of communication. I mean, how are you making allowances for that type of thing?
Well, what you say is exactly the crux of the problem in trying to understand.
Yeah.
To have a machine understand the sentiment of a person, right? And in early days of speech technology, it was all about trying to measure the emotional content, and so that's pretty much all about pitch and tone, right?
Yes.
But what you find is that that's really hard to do over the phone.
Yes.
Just because of the quality of the audio and the way it gets compressed and so forth. So the approach that we took was to say, and we started doing this several years ago, hey, wait a minute, what about all this machine learning and artificial intelligence technology out there? So what we did was say, instead of trying to sort of a priori determine what is a model based on sociological and linguistic analysis and all that stuff, let's just take a bunch of data, a bunch of phone calls, and that's what we did. We took several 100,000 phone calls and used after-call survey data,
right,
to know, in the end, which call did the consumer, were they happy at the end or were they sad at the end or upset at the end, right?
Right.
And then you get enough data, the machine can figure out what's predictive of the positive survey or the negative survey.
Right.
Right? And that's what we did. And we used machine learning to do that. Now, the machine used all the speech, all the words and phrases that they said. It used the pitch and tone elements of the speech, the communication rate, and so forth. But we didn't, predispose it to use pitch and tone more heavily than speech or vice versa.
Right.
Let it figure it out for itself.
Okay.
And that's how we came up with the sentiment model. Now, what's interesting is that this machine learning-based approach shows that the speech, what words people use, is the most predictive element of whether or not they're going to be happy at the end of the interaction.
So not
the pitch and tone type of elements don't really have a lot of weight. It's very interesting.
Wow, so that runs counter to a lot of the linguistic and communication theory that's out there as well.
It doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, I think it does in the sense that as people, we clearly communicate a lot with pitch and tone.
Yes.
But also, people are pretty sophisticated listeners.
Yeah, well, yes,
compared to what machines are able to do. From the perspective of, really what, if you take a very practical approach, we're trying to predict, is the customer positive or negative at the end of the interaction? What's predictive? I mean, we're basically asking a different question.
Yeah. What's
predictive? What's going to lead to the positive outcome versus the negative outcome? And, pitch and tone, it does play a role, right? But it isn't as big as you might think.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think if you think about it from, as you say, when you think about predictive things, you're actually thinking about outcomes, and it seems to me that what you've done is you've reverse engineered. You've taken calls that have had a positive and or negative kind of outcome. You've looked at those kind of calls, and you've almost like backtraced it, and said, well, these are the predictive elements that we should be looking for, which I think is super clever. And that, I think that's really, really, really fascinating. But also the idea that it's like maybe as sophisticated computers ourselves, when we're in an outcome based conversation, let's say, maybe that actually pitch and tone for us doesn't become as important because it's not as nuanced, because it's very much practical and outcome based.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly right.
Excellent. So that's fascinating. I mean, can you give me like a couple of examples of kind of organizations that sort of were say like facing some problems, and they've implemented some of the solutions that you guys have developed there across at NICE, and kind of what they did and how they fared, and sort of the benefits that they've achieved, both from a customer perspective and also an employee perspective?
Sure. So, we talked a little bit about those organizations that have used the personality matching to get results. Many organizations are really using the sentiment calculation now and driving it through their organization, using it to measure and manage the performance of the agents, for instance. So do something like calculate the average sentiment score for each individual agent and compare what is it that the people at the top end of the spectrum who have really positive sentiment calls versus the agents at the bottom. What do they do differently?
Right.
And that opens the door to all sorts of new avenues for coaching and improving the ability of those agents. And then they take it a step further. They then correlate the sentiment to other business outcomes, like so the agents with the really high average sentiment, what is their, say, customer retention rate or first call resolution rate or sales close rate as compared to the agents at the bottom of the spectrum? Is there a relationship between those two things? And indeed, in a lot of cases, they're finding that there is, that the agent who can drive positive sentiment is more likely to get to have a higher close rate. Now,
right.
In one sense, you might think, well, that's kind of obvious.
Yes.
Perhaps. But what's happening is that now it's quantified. Now
Sure.
you have good, hard numbers that you can use to really measure and manage performance and coach to things that it gives you a whole other avenue to coach and improve the agent's performance and deliver that better customer experience.
Absolutely. So do you have any sort of a specific sort of case examples that you could share with us? Because that just makes it sort of very real, and people can almost like put a pin in the map around, here's a brand that's done X, and this is what they've achieved.
Around the sentiment, it's a little bit harder to quantify that in the sense that sentiment is kind of a fuzzy thing.
Right.
What we do know is that there are a couple of large organizations that we have several different communications customers, that are using this technique. These are the companies that provide we know who all they are, right?
Yeah.
And, one of the things that they do is what I just described, using the sentiment as a way to differentiate agent performance and so forth. The second thing they're doing is they have done the statistical analysis to correlate sentiment to Net Promoter Score.
Yes.
And to after call surveys, and that statistical correlation is very, very strong. And now you have a proxy for the after call survey scores and NPS based on every single interaction.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to have a survey completed for each customer. You can infer what it would be if you could get them to respond.
Yeah.
That's not to say that you can stop doing your NPS surveys. You've got to keep doing it to have baseline information and so forth. But again, now you have a measurement of NPS, basically a proxy for NPS for every single customer.
Excellent.
I was going to say that's proving very valuable, especially in the industries where the customer relationship is a subscription type of relationship, like communication.
Sure. And
in healthcare.
Sure.
Right? People have to renew, and it's huge.
Absolutely. So let me go back a second. You can talked about the tracking and monitoring sentiment, whether that's through intelligent routing or just generally overall tracking sentiment of calls. And you talked about it opens up sort of coaching opportunities and all those different things. I mean, could also this be used to inform hiring decisions as well? So you could almost kind of trial somebody on the phone, as it were, or almost and to actually kind of get an insight into how they would fare in certain scenarios.
Yes, absolutely. You can definitely, and again, some of our customers are doing this. They're not just taking sentiment and slicing it by the individual agent, also slicing it by call type, slicing it by product, slicing it by line of business.
Right.
Maybe you have several different products and they have different average sentiment when customers call about those products, right? And then do that by product, by agent, and you get to exactly what you're describing.
Wow. It does. I'm just thinking. My mind is whirring, kind of like the possibilities of that. I mean, in terms of just improving kind of the experience, kind of on both sides of the coin, which is great. But one of the things that I know we talked about the intelligent routing, the sentiment around intelligent routing, and just call monitoring and tracking and things, and what you're doing there. But the other thing I kind of mentioned at the beginning, and the three things I mentioned, was you're also doing this thing around monitoring and modeling the customer journey from start to finish. Can you tell me about that? Because some of that stuff is really interesting, particularly the modeling kind of bit and how the predictive nature of the modeling kind of bit. So can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So we've been talking about human-to-human interactions, stuff that happens in a contact center, right? Well, the concept of the customer journey is one where, if you step back and think about it, the consumer's relationship with the business that they give their money to spans all kinds of different touch points. Mm-hmm. Not just different types of interactions, but even like when you receive a bill, that is a touch point. When the technician comes to your house to install the service, that's a touch point. Mm-hmm. So you want to understand the entire every single touch point and put it all together, and that's what journey analysis is all about. Now, it's one thing to collect all those data points together into a single data store to visualize it. That's great. But it gets really interesting when you start then looking at all the touch points for a single consumer and then figuring out, okay, this chat, this email, this phone call, and this after-call survey, this was all about trying to resolve a billing problem. Mm-hmm. These other interactions that happened over the same period were actually about them ordering new service.
Yes.
So it's actually what we think of as two different journeys. They had two different objectives, two different things they were trying to accomplish, and so that makes it two different journeys. So in order to do that, you got to get deep into not just what were the touch points and what was their order, but what happened inside the touch points.
Right.
When they had an email exchange, or they made a phone call, or they were on the website and went from one page to the next page to the next page on the website. what did that mean they were trying to do and trying to accomplish? And that's the really interesting part of journey analytics. Now, you asked about the predictive element of this.
Yeah.
Well, just like sentiment is kind of a model that predicts an outcome for immediately at the end of an interaction, we've developed something we call the Journey Excellence Score, which is a machine learning driven predictive model that looks at all of the touch points and all of the ways in which an individual journey might be accomplished, and predicts which journey is much more likely to result in the positive outcome, such as, again, going back to, say, communications or healthcare, where we retain the customer instead of the customer canceling their service, preventing churn. So that's the outcome you want. Use modeling to look at all of the different ways people accomplish their transactions, get their bills fixed, order new service, etc., and which paths result in the outcome that you want. And by paths, I mean sometimes it may be that the most excellent journey for adding new service is entirely on the web, or maybe it may be that the most excellent journey starts on the web and finishes on the phone with a human connection. Right. So we want the modeling to figure that out instead of trying to presuppose what constitutes a good journey.
So that could actually that would allow you to. Sorry, I'm just like thinking and speaking out loud a little bit. Can you hear? So that feels a little bit like personalizing the journey for particular types of sort of customers. I mean, can you do that on, how does that work in practice? Is it just modeling, or does it play out in terms of it becomes an intelligent journey organizing system, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, it plays out both ways, and so the first principal initiative is the first big value is figuring out really what are the really good journeys, but more importantly, which journeys result in the outcome you don't want, and fix those. Right. So okay. That the customer doesn't run down those journeys, and we end up in an unhappy situation. And so that's, I would say that right now that's where people are really focused. Is we know that there are lots of different ways in which customers have an experience with us over multiple channels that they don't like. Yeah. So let's fix that and make sure that they get what they do like. Okay. And then now you can see, once you've got that kind of baseline of we've taken care of all of the obviously broken journeys that the system's helped us to diagnose and uncover and fix, now we can get to personalizing it. Right.
Okay. That is fascinating stuff, and really exciting stuff. And before people kind of rush out and kind of buy all these things, I mean, obviously you'd be kind of happy to talk to them all, but before you go out, people rush out and buy all these kind of things, because they might be listening in or reading the highlights and going, wow, that sounds amazing. I need to get all of that tech into my customer experience. I think you and I would probably agree that there's a lot of people that are building slightly Frankenstein-esque kind of customer experiences with their technology stack right now. I mean, from somebody that's from somebody that's in the game, as it were, that's in the thick of it. I mean, people are listening to this and going, "Wow, this sounds very exciting." But where would you encourage them to start? I mean, what should they be doing first before they go out and get the checkbook out?
Yeah. So where would you start? So, we look at it as really, it comes down, all this stuff, if you put it under the broad umbrella of analytics isn't something you buy, it's something that you do. Right. I mean, it's a cute little phrase, but the amount of truth in there, it's 100% true. Yeah. We see over and over again the organizations that approach it as building an expertise in their organization and building analytics and data and making all their decisions data-driven. Those are the ones who succeed. And so you can't do that overnight, and you can't do that just by buying a bunch of technology. Sure. Right? So what you do is you start with some of the most obvious things. Like, we see that just about everybody starts with wanting to understand what's happening with the voice channel in the contact center. Mm-hmm. Right? Because those are the most expensive interactions, the most important interactions. Let's start there. Yeah. And so you put in analytics technology wrapped up in a full-blown analytics program. You're fixing all sorts of first call resolution issues, sentiment issues, performance issues with those live phone calls. And then you start expanding on that program and adding the next channels like chat and email. So there's still human interactions, but they're over text.
Yeah.
And then expand from that. Add the IVR in there. Then add the web and your digital or your mobile applications, and add in all the touch points from, if you're a communications provider, truck rolls or doctor visits if you're with healthcare, whatever, and add all those touch points together. And grow the program by adding more and more data to it, layering it on.
Yeah.
Your expertise and maturity grows with you as you do that.
So it seems to me a bit like that. Yeah, I don't know if you remember going to the circus when you were a child, and you see the guy that used to spin the plates at the circus. So it seems to me what you're saying is get good at spinning a couple of plates before you start adding more plates to your sharp sticks.
That's exactly right. And you keep the end goal in mind, right? Understanding the complete customer journey and personalizing and everything. But you have to crawl, walk, run.
Yeah.
And the technology exists to do it, and you can grow your organization with it as you apply it step by step.
Perfect. So, Larry, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we've missed out on some of this cool new tech that you're developing?
The only other thing I would mention is we didn't talk very much about the sort of pure play raw analytics.
Okay.
Set of technology, and we're working on a series of new capabilities that again apply artificial intelligence and machine learning to do things like uncover new topics that customers are talking about in the contact center, to relate those topics to each other by meaning and not by a priori NLP models and things like that. To identify what's anomalous, what's new and different, and what's changed. So to try to do as much for the business analyst with the machine as we can,
right? Knowing
that the machine can never know as much about the business as the human. So we want to, enable that analyst to think bigger thoughts, so to speak.
Right.
And rather than doing the detailed lifting of extracting the information out of the raw data.
And so when you can talk about that, and you talk about it's, I guess, kind of uncovering patterns and insights and things. I mean, what sort of insights are we talking about? Kind of here, is that kind of maybe things that might be features that can be added, kind of feature, or kind of different use cases that are emerging, or all of the above?
Yeah, it's kind of all of the above. When you talk about, now I'm talking really about, analytics is really about trying to take tons of unstructured or semi-structured data and put some structure around it so that you can learn something.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about speech and text, it is unstructured, and you've got to extract the what happened.
Yes.
It's not just what did they say, but what did they mean?
Yeah.
What did the consumer mean when they said some things? And of course, everybody talks about the same thing slightly differently. So it becomes a very sort of hard analytical problem. And,
yes.
You can always have people sit down and apply their intelligence to that raw data. But what the artificial intelligence is doing is it's becoming more and more capable at extracting, extracting new topics. So, say that you have a service in a particular market, and one of your competitors has launched a new program to try to take your customers away from you.
Yeah.
You didn't know that. You didn't know what was going on. They surprised it on you, and now customers are talking about it. Well, everybody wants and needs the machine to uncover that new situation and surface it. Mm-hmm. And that's what AI is making it possible for us to do in ways that the previous technologies didn't quite get the job done.
Okay, no, that's good. It's just rather than, as you say, rather than just the business analyst kind of just doing the, for want of a better term, the grunt work sort of thing. It's allowing them to think more and more broadly about what customers are talking about, what insights they're sharing and what that actually means for the broader business, both as opportunities and threats, I guess.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Exactly.
That's really exciting, Larry. And I mean, yeah, I'm just thinking about all of that and just thinking, wow, that's very cool. But I know you're a busy guy, and just wanted to say, thank you for sharing, lifting up the hood a little bit on some of the tech that you're developing and kind of what it's doing and how it's doing it and things. I think it's very clever. It's very exciting. I think it feels like it's a step on from where much of what's going on in many kind of other kind of places. So just want to say congrats on that, and thank you for letting us peek inside the box a little bit today. So that's been great.
Yes, thank you. This is a fun conversation, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk about this stuff. We're of course very excited about it, and we can't wait to see more and more of our customers benefiting from it.
Perfect. Well, when I get all this kind of edited up and written up, Larry, I'll give you and the folks at NICE a big shout out. But yeah, thanks once again for sharing your time and your experience with us today. That's been awesome.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you.
Well, that's it for another interview. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, every time I complete one of these interviews, I learn something new, and I try and incorporate that new learning into my writing, my speaking, my workshops, and the consulting that I do for my clients. If you're interested, you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswimsko.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do listen in again. All the very best.